developments in the Edmonton Oilers hockey operations department over the last few days, coming in the wake of Ken Holland's appointment as the NHL team's general manager on May 7th. Duane Sutter was relieved of his duties as the Oilers' head of pro scouting, a move that came on the heels of Craig MacTavish's departure from the club to go coach Yaroslav Lokomotiv, a team in Russia's KHL. MacTavish, a former longtime Oilers head coach and one-time team GM, had been serving as their senior vice president of hockey operations.
If you look at the Oilers' trading history with Peter Chiarelli, somebody has to pay, and Duane Sutter looked after the pro scouting. That said, I think Peter Chiarelli operated in a vacuum to a degree and didn't necessarily listen to some of his pro scouting people all the time as to players he wanted to trade for. So it's funny when a new general manager comes in, there's this feeling with the fan base, since the Oilers are missing the playoffs pretty much every year, that you got to blow it up, blow the entire management structure up. I don't think he was going to do that, but Craig MacTavish went to coach in Europe, in Russia, and he was senior vice president of hockey operations. Now Duane Sutter was the vice president of player personnel, which is basically the head of pro scouting. So now they'll be looking for somebody to replace two people, and I don't necessarily think that's going to happen tomorrow, but there will be changes.
MacTavish hasn't held a full-time coaching job since 2012 with the Chicago Wolves, then the AHL affiliate of the Vancouver Canucks. MacTavish, who stepped down as Oilers coach in 2009, returned to the Edmonton organization after the Wolves job, and a year after that was named Oilers GM before Peter Chiarelli replaced him in April 2015. One question is, why seek out a coaching gig now? MacTavish turned 61 in August.
He's still a coach at heart, and I don't know how it works in terms of Canadian coaches or North American coaches going to the KHL to work. It's not like Craig knows a whole pile of people over in the KHL. He can make a phone call to the president of Yaroslav and say, "Oh, I see you just fired, Gavartnolov. He used to play for the Boston Bruins. He was the coach. How about me?" I think Mark Gandler is a scout, is rather an agent for a lot of players, and knows Russian-born players and also knows everybody in that league. So that he may have been the go-between, but KHL, it'll be an adjustment, but it's still coaching. And if Dave King did it, Mike Keenan did it, Bob Hartley's done it. Lots of coaches in the NHL have gone to Russia to coach and have been pretty successful. I think when it was broached, through Gandler or whoever else, the KHL, I think he wasn't about to dismiss it out of hand. I think he has been with the Oilers for a long, long time. But there's no guarantee when a new general manager comes in that your job is totally safe, and this may have been Craig's being proactive, but Ken Holland had not made up his mind one way or the other with Craig. He'd had one meeting with him, and then Craig at the time said, "I have something else going," and they still ended up talking for quite some time about the Oilers per se, and then talked again later, and Craig said he had the coaching job. 3 or 4 days later, Craig said he had this coaching job in Russia. But Ken, Holland, when I talked to him, had not made up his mind one way or the other. It's too quick. I barely even talked to Craig to find out whether he would fit in the organization, whether he wanted to be an Oiler down the road.
The head of pro scouting is in charge of other pro scouts, sending them on their assignments, giving directions as to what to look for. Pro scouts break down players in the game, give feedback on what they think of players they're watching.
It's getting a book on the players on other teams. You ask the pro scouts if you're thinking of making a trade to go watch a player for a while. The head of pro scouting is, obviously closer to the general manager than the pro scouts are in the field, but he's the conduit to the scouting staff in terms of players elsewhere in the league and the general manager. The other two pro scouts are Paul Messier, Mark's brother, and Christian Hockey. Often the new head of pro scouting will come in and get his own pro scouts, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that all of them or one of them or two of them are going either. But they will be getting a new head of pro scouting, and I don't know necessarily who that would be. I think Keith Gretzky has a very good chance just to replace Craig MacTavish as Senior Vice President of Hockey Ops, which would mean looking after the farm team as well. which is what Craig did, and also some scouting of U.S. colleges. And in terms of pro scouting, I don't think Scott Howson's going anywhere. He's in charge of player development, which is more the amateur side of things. But whether he would move up to be the head of pro scouting, because he's been a former general manager, and I don't know what the linear fashion with Ken Holland is. And then you've got to look at all his people in Detroit as well. He knows the Detroit organization better than anybody, and if he's looking to hire anybody for any positions, he would look to the Red Wings probably before anybody else. I think Tyler Wright is the most logical. They've worked together for a long time. They're pretty close. They summer together. They have places close to one another in the Okanagan. I'm not saying that's why he would get hired, because I think Tyler's probably pretty good at what he does. You would have to give him an assistant general manager's job, though. He's the director of amateur scouting for the Red Wings. You would have to make him an assistant general manager to get him away from Detroit. And anybody who's coming from Detroit would have to get a better job here with more money. You just can't go to, say, Mark Howe, who's the head of pro scouting for Detroit, and say you want to be the head of pro scouting for the Oilers. It doesn't work that way. You have to give him a better job here and more money.
On the coaching front, it sounds like the chances Dave Tippett will be the next head coach of the Oilers are very good. Tippett last coached in the NHL 2 years ago with the Arizona Coyotes, and the veteran appears to have the upper hand on the likes of Todd Nelson, one-time interim bench boss of the Oilers who served last season as an assistant in Dallas.
I still think Dave Tippett is the front runner. I think that there is a large push to have a veteran coach to coach in the Pacific Division. When Todd McCullen's now in LA, Peter DeBoer is in San Jose, Gerard Gallant is in Vegas, and Bill Peters is in Calgary. Now there are some younger coaches like Travis Green in Vancouver, and maybe Dallas Aikens gets in Anaheim. And Rick Tocchet has been around for a while as well. I don't think there's any, stomach's not the word, but I don't know if they want to leap in and hire a first-time NHL head coach to coach the Edmonton Oilers, because Ken Holland's got enough things on his plate rather than mentoring a coach as well. I don't think it would be Dan Bilesma, who was an assistant in Detroit when Ken Holland was there. Assistant to Jeff Blashill. I don't think he's been a former NHL head coach. I don't think he's in the running. But it wouldn't surprise me if, say, Jim Hiller, who's been a long-time assistant with Mike Babcock in Detroit, now in Toronto, was on the list. There's not a lot of the coaches who've coached other NHL teams have got jobs, whether you're Alain Vigneault or other people. Now, I guess you could perhaps look at Mark Crawford or somebody like that. He's been a head coach for quite some time as well. And I think Glenn Gulletson probably deserves an interview too. He's been a head coach twice before, Oilers assistant coach last year, and knows the roster better than anybody of the people that you're going to talk to. Ken Holland has not asked Jim Nill for permission to talk to Todd Nelson. So I think he's been being considered, but whether he's a front runner, I don't think he's a front runner. I still think Dave Tippett is the front runner. Most of the changes are going to happen at the draft. I mean, if you're a fan, you're interested in who's going to coach the team. Who's going to coach the team is of more importance to the general manager and the players on this team than the fan. The players got to play for the coach, and the general manager wants a coach he can deal with every day. The changes of players is more important to the fan, and I think those sort of things will happen at the draft. Whether they give up their first-round pick, 8th overall, whether they trade Milan Lucic, whether they trade a defenseman for a forward, whether they try to get William Nylander or Nicholas Ehlers or whatever, and then after the draft, there's all these free agents, some of which they would probably sign who are forwards to play in the bottom six.